Marcus wiped down the bar counter for the third time that evening, his movements automatic and precise. The Anchor Tavern wasn't much to look at. Dim lighting, worn wooden stools, and the permanent smell of beer and salt air from the nearby naval base. But it was home to some of the toughest warriors in the world, men who found solace in the quiet corner booth where they could drink in peace without questions or judgment. Tonight was different. The usual crowd of Navy SEALs sat hunched over their drinks, their faces darker than Marcus had seen in months. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, a man who had led countless dangerous missions, stared into his whiskey glass as if it held answers to questions he couldn't voice. Beside him, Sergeant Tony Martinez nervously tapped his fingers against the table, a habit that only emerged when something was seriously wrong. Marcus had been serving these men for 5 years. He knew their orders before they spoke, understood their need for silence after brutal deployments, and never asked about the shadows behind their eyes. What they didn't know was that Marcus understood their world better than they could imagine. The carefully maintained calluses on his hands weren't just from lifting beer kegs. The scar that ran along his left shoulder, usually hidden beneath his shirt, told a story of a different life. The television above the bar droned on about local news, but Marcus caught the subtle change in conversation at the corner booth. Words like impossible, suicide mission, and no way out drifted across the room. He pretended to organize bottles while listening to fragments of their discussion. "The intelligence is solid," Jake was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 American contractors being held in a compound 200 miles inside enemy territory. The government won't officially acknowledge they exist, so this is completely off the books. Tony leaned forward, his weathered face creased with worry. "The terrain is a nightmare. Desert mountains, no cover, and the enemy knows we're coming. Even if we get in, getting out alive with 3 civilians." He shook his head and took a long drink. Marcus continued his work, but every word hit him like a physical blow. He recognized the tactical problem they were describing, the same type of mission that had ended his own military career 15 years ago. The same type of impossible situation that had cost him his team, his purpose, and nearly his life. A third voice joined the conversation. Staff Sergeant Kevin O'Brien, the team's demolitions expert, slid into the booth looking defeated. "Command just gave us 48 hours to plan this operation. 48 hours to figure out how to walk into hell and bring 3 people out alive. They might as well ask us to fly to the moon." Marcus's hand stilled on the glass he was cleaning. The weight of memory pressed down on him like a physical force. He could see the faces of his old team, could hear their voices planning similar missions in bars just like this one. The difference was, his team had someone who specialized in exactly these kinds of impossible extractions. Someone who had studied enemy compounds and mountain warfare until he could navigate them, blindfolded. Someone who had been erased from official records after everything went wrong. The bar fell silent except for the low hum of conversation from other patrons. Marcus watched these 3 warriors, men he had come to respect and care about during their regular visits. They were good soldiers, possibly the best, but they were heading into a situation that required more than courage and training. It required experience with this specific type of nightmare. Jake suddenly looked up from his drink, catching Marcus's eye. "Sorry, Marcus. We're being too loud. Professional stuff, you know how it is." Marcus nodded, forcing a casual smile. "No problem. You guys need another round?" As he served their drinks, Marcus studied their faces. Jake, the leader who carried the weight of every decision on his shoulders. Tony, the strategist whose mind could calculate odds and possibilities faster than any computer. Kevin, the explosives expert whose steady hands had saved countless lives. They were exactly the type of men Marcus would have chosen for his own team, back when he had a team to choose. But they were missing something crucial. They were missing the one element that could turn an impossible mission into a difficult one. They were missing someone who had been there before, who had learned from spectacular failure and spent 15 years thinking about how to do it right the next time. Marcus returned to cleaning glasses, his mind racing through tactical possibilities he hadn't considered in over a decade. The compound they were describing sounded familiar, too familiar. The mountain passes, the enemy positions, the timing constraints. It all matched intelligence briefings from his old life. Intelligence he had studied obsessively during long months of recovery and longer months of guilt. The 3 SEALs continued their quiet discussion, occasionally glancing around to ensure no one was listening. They didn't notice that their bartender's movements had become more focused, more purposeful. They didn't see the way his eyes had sharpened, or how his breathing had changed from the relaxed rhythm of a civilian to something more controlled, more military. Marcus made his decision as he watched Jake rub his temples in frustration. These men were walking into the same trap that had destroyed his team 15 years ago. The same impossible geography, the same tactical challenges, the same enemy who had learned to predict exactly how American special forces would approach such a mission. But Marcus knew something the enemy didn't expect. He knew what it was like to fail at this exact type of operation. He knew every mistake that could be made, every assumption that could prove fatal, every detail that seemed minor until it killed you. Most importantly, he knew there was a way to succeed. A way he had figured out too late to save his own team, but just in time to save these men. The question was whether 3 elite Navy SEALs would listen to advice from a bartender, whether they would trust a man who had spent 5 years serving drinks and keeping secrets, whether they were desperate enough to accept help from someone whose greatest qualification was spectacular failure. Marcus hung up his bar towel and walked toward their table, knowing that the next few minutes would either save their lives or confirm that some secrets were meant to stay buried forever. Marcus approached the corner booth with 3 fresh drinks, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't for years. The weight of the moment felt familiar, the same tension he had experienced before every dangerous mission, when everything balanced on the edge of a knife. He set the glasses down carefully, noticing how the 3 SEALs automatically adjusted their positions, a subtle readiness that spoke of years of training and countless combat deployments. "Gentlemen," Marcus said quietly, "I couldn't help but overhear parts of your conversation. I know this might sound strange coming from someone who serves drinks for a living, but I think I can help with your problem." Jake looked up sharply, his eyes immediately suspicious. In their world, loose lips cost lives, and they had been careless in a public place. "Listen, Marcus, we appreciate the concern, but this is military business. Nothing you need to worry about." Marcus pulled an empty chair from a nearby table and sat down without invitation, a move that immediately put all 3 men on alert. Everything about his posture had changed. The casual friendliness was gone, replaced by something harder, more purposeful. When he spoke again, his voice carried an authority that made them lean forward despite themselves. 3 American contractors being held in a mountain compound 200 miles inside hostile territory, desert terrain with minimal cover, heavily fortified position, and a 48-hour planning window for an off-the-books extraction. Marcus's words were precise, clinical. "You're looking at a 90% casualty rate with conventional approaches, and that's being optimistic." The silence at the table was deafening. Tony's hand had moved instinctively toward his weapon before he remembered they were in a civilian bar. Kevin's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications of what they had just heard. Jake's face went through several expressions before settling on cold calculation. "Who the hell are you?" Jake's voice was barely controlled, the question carrying both threat and confusion. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn identification card, placing it face down on the table. 15 years ago, I was Master Sergeant Marcus Thompson, Army Special Forces. My team specialized in impossible extractions from heavily fortified positions. We had a 100% success rate right up until the day we didn't. Jake picked up the identification card, his expression changing as he read the information. Tony and Kevin leaned in to see the faded military ID that showed a younger Marcus in uniform. The photo was unmistakably the same man, but everything else about him had been different. Harder eyes, tighter jaw, the unmistakable bearing of an elite soldier. "I've never heard of you," Tony said suspiciously, "and I know most of the Special Forces operators from that era." "You wouldn't have," Marcus replied. "My team and our missions were classified at levels that don't officially exist. We handled situations that were too sensitive for regular special operations, too dangerous for anyone sane to volunteer for, the kind of operations that get erased from records when they go wrong." Kevin leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new eyes. "What happened to your team?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus had spent 15 years avoiding that conversation, but now it was necessary. These men needed to understand why they should trust him, and more importantly, why they needed to change their approach to this mission. "We got a mission exactly like yours," Marcus said, his voice steady but carrying years of pain. 3 American intelligence assets being held in a mountain compound. Similar terrain, similar enemy tactics, similar impossible timeline. My team was the best at this type of operation, and we went in confident we could handle anything. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. We studied the satellite imagery, planned multiple contingencies, trained for every scenario we could imagine. What we didn't account for was that the enemy had been studying us too. They knew how American special forces approach these problems. They had analyzed our successful missions and learned to counter our tactics. Jake set the ID card on the table, but didn't push it back toward Marcus. How many did you lose? All of them, Marcus answered without hesitation. 6 of the best soldiers I ever served with. Dead because I couldn't think beyond conventional special operations doctrine. The people we went in to rescue were executed before we even reached the compound. The entire mission was a trap designed specifically for teams like ours. The weight of that admission settled over the table. These were men who understood the cost of failure in their line of work. But total mission failure was something they had never experienced personally. The idea that an entire team could be lost was a nightmare they trained to prevent, but rarely discussed openly. So why should we trust advice from someone who failed? Kevin asked bluntly, but without malice. It was a fair question from a man whose life might depend on the answer. Marcus smiled grimly. Because failure is the best teacher, and I've had 15 years to think about what went wrong. I've studied every aspect of that mission, analyzed every decision, imagined every alternative approach. I know exactly how the enemy thinks about these situations, and more importantly, I know how to do it right. Tony was studying Marcus intently, his strategic mind processing this new information. If you're so sure you can solve this problem, why are you working as a bartender instead of back in the military? Because after my team was killed, I spent 2 years in military hospitals recovering from wounds that should have been fatal. When I was finally ready for duty, I discovered that my unit had been officially disbanded and all records of our operations had been classified beyond my security clearance. As far as the military was concerned, Master Sergeant Marcus Thompson never existed. Marcus reached across the table and retrieved his ID card. I was given a choice. Accept a medical discharge with full benefits and never speak about my service, or face court-martial for violations of the Official Secrets Act. I chose to disappear into civilian life, but I never stopped being a soldier. I just became a soldier without a uniform. Jake exchanged glances with his teammates, a silent communication that spoke of years working together. Marcus recognized the look. It was the same way his old team had communicated during critical moments. These men were deciding whether to trust him, whether to bring a civilian bartender into their classified world. Even if everything you're saying is true, Jake said carefully, this is our mission, our responsibility. We don't bring outsiders into operational planning no matter what their background. Then you're going to die, Marcus said simply. All 3 of you, plus the people you're trying to rescue, because you're planning to make the exact same mistakes my team made, and the enemy is waiting for you to make them. The brutally honest assessment hit the table like a physical blow. These were elite warriors accustomed to impossible odds, but they were also smart enough to recognize expertise when they encountered it. Marcus could see the internal debate playing out on their faces. What exactly are you proposing? Jake asked finally, his voice neutral but his eyes intense. Marcus leaned forward, and when he spoke, every word carried the weight of hard-earned experience. I'm proposing that you let me help you plan a mission that actually has a chance of success. I'm proposing that you listen to someone who has failed at exactly what you're about to attempt and learned from that failure. Most importantly, I'm proposing that you let me come with you. The last sentence hung in the air like an explosion. None of them had expected that. Marcus wasn't offering advice or consultation. He was offering to return to the world that had cost him everything, to risk his life for men he barely knew on a mission that had already destroyed him once before. The silence stretched for nearly a minute, each man lost in his own thoughts. Jake studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of deception or instability. What he saw instead was something he recognized from his own mirror after difficult missions, the haunted determination of a professional who had paid a terrible price for his education. You're talking about joining a classified military operation, Tony said slowly. You're a civilian now. No security clearance, no official status, no legal protection if this goes sideways. Marcus nodded. I understand the risks. But I also understand that you're walking into the same tactical situation that killed my team. The compound you're targeting, I've seen the intelligence reports. The enemy positions, the approach routes, the timing constraints. It's all identical to what we faced 15 years ago. Kevin leaned forward, his explosive expert's mind working through the implications. How could you possibly know the details of our current mission? That information is compartmentalized at the highest levels. Because it's not really a current mission, Marcus replied. It's the same mission that's been attempted 7 times in the last 20 years. Different hostages, different political circumstances, but the same enemy. The same location, the same impossible tactical problem. Every attempt has failed. Every team has suffered massive casualties. The 3 SEALs exchanged glances again. Marcus was describing something they hadn't been told. Information that put their mission in a completely different context. Jake's expression darkened as he considered the implications. Command didn't mention previous attempts, Jake said, his voice carrying an edge of anger that hadn't been there before. They never do, Marcus said. Each team gets told they're dealing with a unique situation, a one-time opportunity. Command doesn't want you thinking about failure rates or impossible odds. They want you focused on the mission, not distracted by history. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed them a news article from 18 months earlier. The headline read, "Contractor Deaths in Overseas Incident," and the story was deliberately vague, mentioning only that 3 American citizens had died in what was described as an industrial accident. Those were the hostages from the previous attempt, Marcus explained. The team that went in to rescue them made it to the compound, but they couldn't get out. When extraction became impossible, Command authorized an airstrike to prevent capture and interrogation. Everyone died. Hostages, rescue team, everyone. The weight of this revelation settled over the table like a dark cloud. These were men who had volunteered for dangerous missions their entire careers, but they had always believed their superiors were honest about the risks involved. The idea that they were being sent on a mission with a known history of total failure was a betrayal that cut deep. "Why are you telling us this?" Jake asked quietly. "If you've been out of the military for 15 years, how do you know about recent operations?" Marcus hesitated, then made a decision that would change everything. "Because I've been tracking these missions ever since my team was killed. Every few years, Command tries again with a new team and a new approach.
I've watched good soldiers die attempting the same impossible extraction, making the same tactical errors.
Walking into the same trap." He pulled out a thick folder from beneath his jacket, placing it on the table between them. The folder was worn and filled with documents, photographs, and maps. "I've spent 15 years collecting intelligence on this target. Satellite imagery, enemy patrol patterns, local informant reports, architectural blueprints. Everything Command should have given you, but didn't." Tony reached for the folder, then stopped. "Gathering this kind of intelligence as a civilian, that's not just illegal, it's potentially treason." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged, "but watching good soldiers die because of inadequate planning is definitely wrong. I made a choice about which was more important." Jake opened the folder and immediately recognized the compound from their briefing materials, but Marcus's intelligence was far more detailed. The satellite photos were more recent, the structural analysis more complete, and there were documents Jake had never seen before, documents that revealed critical information about enemy capabilities and defensive positions. "This is incredible," Kevin said, studying a detailed schematic of the compound's interior layout. "We were told the building plans weren't available. This shows ventilation systems, electrical layouts, structural weak points. Command has access to all of this information," Marcus said. "They choose not to share it because they don't want teams spending time developing creative solutions. They want you to execute a standard assault plan, even though standard plans don't work against this target." Jake was studying a series of photographs showing enemy patrol patterns taken over several months. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing timing, routes, personnel changes, even seasonal variations in security procedures. It was exactly the kind of intelligence that could make an impossible mission merely dangerous. "How did you get this?" Jake asked. 15 years of patience and a lot of money," Marcus replied. "After my discharge, I used my military pension and disability payments to hire private intelligence contractors. Former CIA retired military intelligence officers, freelance operators who work in that region. I built my own intelligence network focused entirely on this one target." Tony looked up from a document detailing enemy communication procedures. This must have cost a fortune. It did. I've lived in a one-bedroom apartment above this bar for 15 years, spent every spare dollar on intelligence gathering. I don't own a car, don't take vacations, don't have any life beyond preparing for the day when I might have another chance to get this right. The admission revealed something profound about Marcus's psychological state. This wasn't just professional interest or academic curiosity. This was a man whose entire existence had been focused on redemption, on finding a way to balance the scales for his team's death. "You've been planning a return mission for 15 years, Jake said, understanding dawning in his voice. "You've been waiting for another team to be assigned this target." Marcus nodded. "I knew it would happen eventually. Command never gives up on targets like this one. The political value is too high, and they always believe the next team will succeed where previous teams failed." Kevin was studying tactical maps marked with approach routes and fallback positions. "These plans are completely different from our briefing. You're suggesting approaches that avoid all the obvious infiltration routes." "Because the obvious routes are death traps," Marcus said. "Every team has used them, and every team has walked into prepared ambushes. The enemy knows exactly how American Special Forces think, how we assess terrain, how we plan operations. They've turned our own doctrine against us." Jake closed the folder and looked directly at Marcus. "Let me understand this completely. You want to join our mission using intelligence you've gathered illegally over 15 years? To attempt a rescue operation that has already killed multiple teams, in order to make up for a failure that happened before we even enlisted?" "That's exactly what I'm proposing," Marcus said without hesitation. The three SEALs sat in silence, processing everything they had learned. Marcus had given them information that completely changed their understanding of the mission, revealed that their superiors had been less than honest about the risks, and offered expertise that could potentially save their lives. He was also asking them to trust a man whose last military operation had ended in disaster. "We need to discuss this privately," Jake said finally. Marcus stood up from the table. "Take all the time you need. But remember, you have less than 46 hours now, and conventional planning is going to get you killed. When you're ready to try a different approach, I'll be behind the bar." As Marcus walked away, the three SEALs were left to grapple with an impossible decision: trust their training and experience, or bet their lives on the word of a bartender who claimed to have solved a problem that had defeated every team before them. Marcus returned to his position behind the bar, methodically cleaning glasses while keeping one eye on the corner booth where three of the world's most elite soldiers were deciding his fate. 20 minutes had passed, and their heated, whispered conversation showed no signs of reaching conclusion. He could read their body language like a book, Jake's rigid posture indicating command responsibility, Tony's rapid hand gestures showing strategic analysis in progress, Kevin's steady gaze suggesting he was calculating risks and benefits with mathematical precision. The bar's regular customers continued their evening routines, unaware that a conversation in the corner booth might determine whether 3 American hostages lived or died. Marcus served drinks and made small talk, but his mind was 15 years in the past, reliving the night his own team had made similar calculations in a similar bar before their final mission. Finally, Jake stood up and walked to the bar alone. His teammates remained at the table, watching the interaction carefully. Marcus poured Jake's usual whiskey without being asked, then waited for the verdict that would either validate 15 years of preparation or confirm that some failures couldn't be redeemed. "We've got conditions," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of command decision. "First, this conversation never happened. Second, if we bring you in, you follow orders without question. Third, if this goes bad, you never existed. No rescue attempts, no official acknowledgement, nothing." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications completely. "Accepted. All of it. There's more," Jake continued. "We need proof that your intelligence is current and accurate. Tony's going to give you specific questions about enemy capabilities and defensive positions. If your answers don't match what we can verify through our own channels, this conversation ends." "Fair enough," Marcus replied, though he felt confident his intelligence was better than anything they had access to through official channels. Jake returned to the table and spoke briefly with his teammates. Tony approached the bar with a small notebook, his expression skeptical but professional. Marcus recognized the look. It was the same way his old team had tested new intelligence sources, demanding specificity that proved reliability. The compound's main gate, Tony said, reading from his notes. Our briefing says it's reinforced steel with electronic locks and two-man security posts. What can you tell us about it? Marcus smiled slightly. Your briefing is 18 months out of date. The main gate was replaced 6 months ago after a truck bomb attack by local insurgents. It's now concrete barriers with manual locks and a 4-man rotating post. More importantly, there's a motion sensor system that wasn't there before, and the guards have been trained to lock down the entire facility if they detect unauthorized movement in the approach zone. Tony made notes rapidly, cross-referencing something in his own materials. Guard rotation schedule? Changed completely after the truck bomb incident, Marcus replied. Used to be 12-hour shifts with shift changes at noon and midnight. Now it's 8-hour rotations at 6-hour intervals, deliberately inconsistent to prevent pattern recognition. Current schedule has shifts at 0800, 1400, and 2200 hours, but they occasionally add random 30-minute delays to prevent timing attacks. Kevin had joined them at the bar, listening intently. Power systems? Dual generators, one primary and one backup, both diesel. The backup system was upgraded 4 months ago because of regional electrical grid instability. There's also a battery system that can maintain security systems for 6 hours without generator power. However, Marcus paused meaningfully, there's a design flaw in the electrical distribution that creates a 15-second vulnerability window during generator switching. The specificity and currency of Marcus's information was clearly impressing both men. Tony continued with increasingly detailed questions about surveillance systems, communication procedures, personnel assignments, and structural modifications. Marcus answered each question with precision, often providing information that was more recent and detailed than their official briefings. How many hostages are currently being held? Tony asked, testing whether Marcus knew details about their specific mission. 3 American contractors, Michael Chen, petroleum engineer, Sarah Rodriguez, telecommunications specialist, David Kim, security consultant. Chen was captured 8 months ago, Rodriguez 6 months ago, Kim 4 months ago. They're being held in the compound's basement level, separate cells, probably in the section that used to be a wine cellar before the building was converted. Kevin looked impressed despite his initial skepticism. Guard details for the basement level? Single guard during day shifts, 2 guards during night shifts. The day guard is usually one of their least experienced personnel because they consider basement duty boring. Night guards are more alert because they take prisoner security more seriously after dark. There's also a roving patrol that checks the basement every 2 hours during day shifts, every hour at night. Tony closed his notebook and exchanged a look with Kevin. Both men had gotten answers that were far more detailed than their official intelligence briefings. They returned to the corner booth for another whispered conference with Jake. Marcus continued his bartending duties, but he could feel the momentum shifting. His intelligence was proving accurate and current, which meant his tactical analysis would likely be taken seriously. The question now was whether they would accept his participation in the actual mission. After another 10 minutes of discussion, all 3 SEALs approached the bar together. Jake spoke for the group, his voice carrying the authority of final decision. Your intelligence checks out. Better than checks out. It's more complete than anything we've been given through official channels. That tells us 2 things. Either you're exactly who you claim to be, or you're the most sophisticated enemy agent we've ever encountered. Marcus waited, understanding that Jake wasn't finished. We're going with option 1, Jake continued. Tony's verified 3 of your claims through back-channel contacts, and Kevin's confirmed that the electrical system vulnerability you mentioned matches classified engineering reports we have access to. Either you're legitimate, or someone's running an impossibly complex deception operation just to infiltrate one SEAL team. So what's the decision? Marcus asked. We want to see your tactical plan, Jake said. Not just intelligence, but your actual approach for how to make this mission work. If your plan is sound, we'll recommend to command that you be attached to our team as a civilian contractor specialist. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. After 15 years of preparation, he was finally getting the chance he had worked toward. Command will never approve civilian participation in this type of operation. Command doesn't need to know you're a civilian, Kevin said with a slight smile. As far as official records are concerned, you'll be Master Sergeant Marcus Thompson, temporarily assigned from a classified unit that doesn't officially exist. Your old specialty in impossible extractions makes you exactly the kind of expert they'd want on this mission. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. The same classification systems that had erased his military service could now be used to restore it, at least temporarily. The bureaucratic machinery that had forced him into civilian life could make him a soldier again. There's one more thing, Tony added. If we do this, it's not just about the mission. We need to know why this matters so much to you personally. We need to understand what's driving this 15-year obsession, because that's going to affect your judgment under pressure. Marcus looked at each of them. 3 professionals who understood the cost of the work they did. They deserved honesty, even if it revealed vulnerabilities that might disqualify him from participation. My team died because I was arrogant, he said simply. I believed our training and experience made us invincible. I didn't respect the enemy's intelligence and preparation. 6 good soldiers died because their leader thought he was smarter than he actually was. He paused, choosing his words carefully. For 15 years, I've lived with the knowledge that better planning and tactical thinking could have saved their lives. This mission is my chance to prove that their deaths taught me something valuable, that their sacrifice wasn't completely meaningless. Jake nodded slowly. Redemption. Redemption, Marcus agreed. But more than that, prevention. If I can keep your team alive and bring those hostages home, then maybe some small part of my failure gets balanced by success. The 3 SEALs looked at each other one final time, another of their silent communications. When Jake turned back to Marcus, his expression had changed from professional evaluation to something approaching acceptance. Show us your plan, Jake said. Show us how to succeed where 7 other teams have failed. Marcus locked the front door of the Anchor Tavern and flipped the sign to closed, then led the 3 SEALs to a back room they had never seen before. Behind a bookshelf filled with liquor inventory records was a door that opened into what could only be described as a military planning center. The walls were covered with satellite photographs, tactical maps, architectural drawings, and intelligence reports. 3 computer monitors displayed real-time surveillance feeds from the target area, and a large table held a detailed scale model of the compound and surrounding terrain. Jesus, Kevin whispered, looking around the room in amazement. You built a full intelligence operations center above a bar. Marcus activated additional lighting, revealing the full scope of his 15-year preparation. Every wall told the story of obsessive attention to detail, weather patterns by season, enemy personnel files with photographs and behavioral analysis, equipment specifications, even detailed studies of local wildlife that might affect movement through the area. This is what 15 years of focused intelligence gathering looks like, Marcus said, moving to the central planning table. Every piece of information that could possibly affect mission success, analyzed and cross-referenced until I understood this target better than the people who work there. Jake approached the scale model, immediately recognizing its accuracy and detail. The compound was reproduced down to individual windows, guard posts, and defensive positions. Even the surrounding terrain showed elevation changes, rock formations, and vegetation patterns that would affect approach routes. Walk us through it, Jake commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a leader ready to make life or death decisions based on what he was about to hear. Marcus moved to the head of the table, shifting into the role he had been preparing for since his discharge. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of expertise earned through study and failure. Every previous team has made the same fundamental error, he began, pointing to the compound model. They've approached this as a standard hostage rescue operation, focusing on speed and overwhelming force. The problem is this isn't a standard situation. The enemy has studied American Special Forces doctrine and designed their defenses specifically to counter our tactics. Tony leaned over the model, studying the defensive positions. So what makes your approach different? Previous teams have tried to fight their way in and fight their way out, Marcus explained, using colored markers to trace different approach routes on the terrain model. They've focused on neutralizing enemy resistance through superior firepower and tactics. But this compound was built to absorb that kind of assault. The enemy wants us to try a frontal attack because they're prepared for it. He moved to a wall covered with photographs of previous mission failures. Team Alpha tried a helicopter assault on the main compound, shot down during approach. Team Bravo attempted a night infiltration through the main gate, walked into a prepared ambush. Team Charlie tried a climbing assault on the rear wall, got caught in a crossfire from positions they didn't know existed. Kevin studied the failure analysis, recognizing the tactical soundness of each approach and the sophistication required to counter them. So if conventional special operations tactics don't work, what's your alternative? Marcus smiled grimly and moved to a section of the wall covered with local cultural and economic information, details that would never appear in a standard military briefing. The key is understanding that this compound isn't just a fortress. It's also a business operation that depends on local community relationships and regional economic networks. He pointed to a series of photographs showing local markets, trade routes, and community gatherings. The enemy leadership has spent years integrating into the local power structure. They're not just foreign fighters hiding in a mountain stronghold. They're employers, customers, and political allies of the surrounding communities. Jake was beginning to see the direction of Marcus's thinking. You're talking about a social engineering approach rather than a military assault. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Instead of fighting our way in, we become part of the local economic system. Instead of overwhelming the defenses, we bypass them entirely by becoming people who belong in that environment. Marcus moved to another wall, showing detailed profiles of local businesses, trade relationships, and cultural practices. 3 months ago, the compound's main generator failed and they needed specialized repair services. 6 months ago, they had a problem with their water purification system. 8 months ago, they brought... 16 hours later, Marcus stood in the back of a modified cargo truck applying the final touches to his disguise as a maintenance contractor. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the casual bartender, replaced by a weathered technician in work clothes stained with generator oil and electrical grease. His hands, which had spent 5 years serving drinks, now held specialized tools with the confidence of someone who had used them professionally for decades. Jake sat across from him, similarly disguised and reviewing their final coordination signals. The SEAL commander had spent the previous day convincing his superiors that Marcus was a classified asset, whose expertise was essential for mission success. The conversation had required careful manipulation of bureaucratic protocols, but Jake's reputation and the mission's importance had ultimately overcome official resistance to civilian involvement. Radio check. Tony's voice crackled through their concealed communication devices. He was positioned with Kevin at the tunnel extraction point, 2 miles from the compound, but connected through secure communications that Marcus had somehow arranged through his private intelligence network. Maintenance Team 1. Clear, Jake responded, using their operational call signs. Maintenance Team 2, clear, Marcus added, surprised by how natural it felt to be using military communications again after 15 years. The truck driver, one of Marcus's contracted assets, called back to them in the local language. Marcus translated automatically, his linguistic skills another remnant of his special forces background that had been maintained through years of intelligence gathering. He says we're 10 minutes from the checkpoint. Security routine is exactly what we expected. Documentation review, vehicle inspection, escort to the worksite. Marcus's voice carried confidence, but Jake could see the tension in his posture. This was the moment when 15 years of theoretical planning would meet operational reality. As the truck approached the compound, Marcus felt the familiar pre-mission clarity that had once defined his existence. Every detail of their surroundings matched his intelligence reports perfectly. Guard positions, vehicle checkpoints, even the placement of security cameras corresponded exactly to his surveillance data. Either his intelligence network was extraordinarily accurate, or they were driving into the most sophisticated trap ever constructed for American Special Forces. The checkpoint procedure unfolded exactly as Marcus had predicted. Guards examined their forged documentation with professional thoroughness but without suspicion. The work order for emergency generator maintenance was accepted as routine business, and their truck was waved through to the compound service area without additional screening. So far, so good, Jake murmured as they were escorted toward the generator, building by a bored-looking guard who clearly considered maintenance visits a mundane interruption to his day. Marcus began his work on the backup generator with the practiced efficiency of someone who had studied every component through detailed technical manuals, but his real attention was focused on mapping the compound's interior layout, confirming guard positions, and locating the basement access points that would be critical for hostage extraction. Generator diagnostics complete, he reported through his concealed microphone after 2 hours of methodical work. Ready for power system testing phase. This was the code phrase indicating that he had confirmed the year, locations of all 3 hostages and verified that the tunnel access route was viable. Jake acknowledged the report and began his own phase of the operation, creating legitimate reasons to inspect electrical systems throughout the compound. As the senior maintenance technician, he was able to request access to basement areas, communication equipment rooms, and security system components that previous teams had never been able to approach without triggering defensive responses. At exactly 1300 hours, Marcus initiated the power system test that would create their 15-second window of electronic vulnerability. Switching to backup power for system verification, he announced to the compound's maintenance supervisor, who nodded approvingly at such thorough professional procedures. The compound's electrical system shut down briefly, then switched to backup power exactly as Marcus had calculated. During those 15 seconds of electronic confusion, Jake moved through the basement level with impossible speed, using master keys he had obtained during his equipment inspections to access the hostage cells. Michael. Chen looked up in confusion as his cell door opened to reveal a man in maintenance coveralls making urgent hand signals for silence. Chen had been held for 8 months, but his engineering background helped him understand immediately that this was either a rescue attempt or a very sophisticated psychological operation. Sarah, Rodriguez, and David Kim were equally startled but responded quickly to Jake's whispered instructions. All 3 hostages were physically weak from months of captivity, but mentally alert enough to follow complex directions. Within 12 minutes, they were being guided through maintenance corridors toward the tunnel access point that Marcus had identified. Package 1 through 3 secured and moving, Jake reported tersely, using code phrases to indicate that all hostages were alive and mobile. Tony's voice crackled back immediately. Extraction team ready. Tunnel route confirmed clear. The most dangerous phase of the operation was the 50-meter movement through underground tunnels that connected the compound's basement to the external access point. The hostages, weakened by months of captivity, struggled with the physical demands of crawling through confined spaces, but adrenaline and hope carried them forward. Marcus continued his generator maintenance work above ground, creating legitimate noise and activity that would mask any sounds from the tunnel system. Every few minutes, he provided status updates to the compound's security personnel, maintaining the appearance of routine maintenance while actually coordinating one of the most complex extraction operations ever attempted. Package delivery complete, Tony reported after what felt like hours but had actually been 27 minutes. All 3 hostages were now outside the compound's perimeter, in the hands of the extraction team, and moving toward their evacuation point. Marcus began the final phase of generator maintenance, methodically completing every procedure that would be expected of a professional technician. The work had to be perfect. Any shortcuts or oversights might raise suspicions during post-incident investigations that could compromise future operations. At 15:47 hours, 3 minutes ahead of schedule, Marcus and Jake packed their tools and prepared to leave the compound through normal departure procedures. The generator was running perfectly. All maintenance documentation was properly completed, and they had every reason to expect standard contractor treatment during their exit processing. But as they approached the main gate, Marcus noticed a change in the guards' behavior. Radio conversations were more frequent, and there was a tension that hadn't been present during their morning arrival. Something had altered the compound's security status, and they were about to discover whether their extraction had been detected. Documentation check, the gate guard announced, but his voice carried suspicion rather than routine formality. Jake handed over their paperwork with the casual confidence of someone who had done nothing more exciting than repair a generator. Marcus maintained his cover as the junior technician, deferring to Jake's authority, while mentally calculating distances to cover and probable response times if their situation deteriorated rapidly. The guard spent longer than expected, reviewing their documentation, occasionally speaking into his radio in the local language. Marcus understood enough to know they were asking questions about maintenance schedules and work authorization, but he couldn't determine whether this was standard security protocol or active investigation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guard handed back their papers and waved them through the gate. Their truck driver, who had been waiting patiently and showing no signs of nervousness, started the engine and drove them away from the compound at exactly the speed expected of someone completing routine business. Clear of immediate threat zone, Jake reported once they were safely beyond visual range of the compound's security systems. Tony's voice came back with barely controlled excitement. All packages delivered successfully. Extraction complete. Mission accomplished. Marcus leaned back against the truck's wall, feeling 15 years of preparation and guilt finally beginning to lift from his shoulders. The hostages were safe, the rescue team was intact, and they had accomplished something that 7 previous teams had died attempting. But the real test of success wouldn't come until they reached their final extraction point and could confirm that no one had been left behind, that no additional complications were developing, and that the mission's success wouldn't be compromised by pursuit or retaliation. As their truck disappeared into the mountain roads that would carry them back to safety, Marcus allowed himself the first genuine smile he had experienced in 15 years. His team was gone and nothing could bring them back, but their sacrifice had finally taught him something valuable enough to save other lives. Behind them, the compound continued its daily routine, unaware that 3 American hostages had been spirited away through tunnels that predated their security systems, by men who had succeeded where elite military units had failed, using a plan developed not in Pentagon war rooms but above a small bar, by someone the military had forgotten existed. The mission was complete, but Marcus knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new understanding of what was possible when conventional military thinking was combined with unconventional intelligence gathering and tactical innovation. Somewhere other hostages were waiting for rescue, other impossible missions were being planned, and other teams would need the kind of expertise that could only be gained through spectacular failure and 15 years of obsessive preparation for redemption.